Today, joining me for coffee is Professor Josef Jančář. He has several affiliations, but his primary port of call is at Brno University of Technology, and he is a specialist in advanced polymer systems. Professor Jančář, we live in the polymer age. Is it coming to an end?
Definitely not. I think that we can call our age a plastic age because plastics have introduced many new opportunities and solved a lot of problems that humankind was facing. On the other side, as any material, they create some problems which we have to deal with. But in no case, that's the end of the plastic age.
Okay, so you mentioned that they've given us a lot of things. So can you be a bit more specific? What have plastics and polymers given to us?
Well, these materials are generally lightweight, relatively cheap, very versatile materials which can be easily processed at low temperatures, reprocessed, most of them, and thank you. And generally can be produced in large quantities. They brought a new era in packaging, but they introduced possibilities in dentistry, in surgery, in plastic surgery. Most of the cars and the other means of transportation need to have low weight, and the plastics can provide that. Airplanes are full of plastics. 35% of weight of cars is plastic, and with the introduction of electromobility, that's even more. In construction, that's exactly the same, insulation and so forth.
Okay, well, let me just jump in there, because of course plastics in cars, in aeroplanes and other mobility, then they of course make those devices very much lighter. There's obvious fuel savings. That's very good for the environment. Nevertheless, that use of plastic is something which can be easily recycled, potentially, and it's used for a long period. Let's talk more about one-use plastics, many of which are used in packaging. You mentioned packaging briefly. Surely we can package with paper bags instead of plastic, or with glass bottles instead of plastic bottles. Why don't we?
Well, there are many reasons for that. Plastics are generally, most of them are inert against the environment, which means that they can protect the content of the packaging from bacteria, from different gases and so forth. And that's why we use them instead of paper, for example, in food packaging, because they extend the life of the food, the freshness and so forth. There are studies showing that if we replace plastic packaging in food with paper, we will increase the amount of food waste by 30%, which is a huge amount of spoiled food. On the other hand, there are many packaging which are not necessary. I remember a couple of years ago the European Commission introduced a requirement that for bakery, each baker and each roll has to be pretty much separately packaged, or you need this plastic single-use gloves to touch it, which is very good for the hygiene of the food, but creates a lot of very hard to recycle plastic waste.
So there's a clear advantage in terms of the longevity of the food products.
That's right.
We can keep food for longer periods and therefore reduce food waste, which, as you've highlighted, is a significant pollution aspect for our global economy. On the other hand, then we generate a new waste material, which are the plastics which remain. Why do we, as a human population, why do we just throw it away? Surely, as a scientist, you understand the inherent value that these molecules and materials have. What are we doing wrong, and what can we do better?
Well, the question seems very simple, but the answer is not that simple. One thing is that most of the plastic packaging is so cheap that we don't appreciate the value which is actually in it. The other is that a lot of it ends up in a municipal waste because we just don't have the recycling cans at home, which we can really separate it at home. And some of us actually put it in the containers which are outside the houses for plastic waste. But most of it because we really don't feel and don't appreciate the value which is in these plastic, especially the energy which has been put in their production.
And of course, there's plastics and there's plastics. It's not just the case there's one material, but there are several different polymers which we use in plastic materials. So do you believe that we should, from the supply side, should we limit the number of plastics that we're using?
Well, one of the reasons for that is that to a certain extent the wide variety of plastics which are used is because the wide variety of requirements which are put from the side of the products they are used in. But there are some polymers, such as polypropylene, for example, which can be modified by additives, both organic and inorganic, to provide a wide range of performance or properties which can be used over a wide range of products. And definitely one way how to reduce the plastic waste would be to reduce a number of polymers used in those single-use applications.
And is it your opinion that we're spending enough resources and time looking into the research work necessary to achieve this? As
a scientist, we never have enough money for research, so I'm not quite sure about that. There has to be a demand for this type of research, which seems to be it's now being stronger and stronger. But unfortunately, the funding is not sufficient for multiple reasons. One of it is that most of the funding agencies are looking for original results which are publishable in high impact factor journals, and these research and recycling, for example, is a very applied research which doesn't have the response in.
So this is the main disconnect. I mean, I can see that clearly, that when as a scientist you want to be doing high tech, very innovative, very new stuff, but when there's a genuine huge demand now to try and solve what might be termed as a crisis regarding global plastic wastes, there has to be some sort of drive for that. I mean, I would argue that there's the public have already entered a phase where there is so many articles written in today's newspapers, so much information regarding what the levels of plastic waste. So presumably the governments must react to that, and it seems sensible to try and promote that kind of research work at institutions like where you work.
Well, we are expecting that, and we are actually ready to react to that. The problem usually is that there is a big time lag between what is being published in newspapers and what are the proclamations of the politicians, and before any actual action is being taken, especially any funding scheme is established. So, but there is an increasing number of let's say, interest groups which are trying to really put together a framework for this type of activity.
Okay. Professor Jančář, if I was a funding body, a global funding body, and I gave you and your group an unlimited number of resources, unlimited blank check with as much money as you needed, and I gave you the mandate to clean up our oceans, sort the plastic waste, what would you do?
Well, that's again a question which you know, I am not quite sure I can answer comprehensively. But generally, if we look where the plastic waste ends up, a large portion of it ends up in the ocean. The oceans are actually fed by rivers, and so it has to come from rivers. And it's well known that it comes, most of it comes from 10 rivers. So we should look what's wrong along these rivers that so much plastic waste ends up in their stream. And I think that these are countries like China, India, Malaysia, mostly in Asia and in mid-Africa. We should focus maybe on developing sustainable technologies for them to use this plastic waste which is on the banks of the rivers into products which the Western society can actually accept, and that will maybe solve some of their societal problems as well as the plastic waste. At least will limit the impact on the oceans. And generally it's very dangerous to give unlimited resources to anyone, so I wouldn't suggest that.
But nevertheless, I mean, when we have a problem of the stature that we do have, and there's a desire to solve that, then it's encouraging to hear that the majority of plastic waste going into our waterways, into our seas and oceans, are coming from just 10 rivers.
That's right.
As you said, 8 located in the Far East, 2 in Africa. 10 rivers, it seems almost, just using common sense, that this is a problem we could deal with. And listening to you, then it's the first step is to find some sort of political consensus, presumably, to be able to contact these countries and work out how we can help each other to solve the problem. The technology, is it there?
I think that a lot of technologies already exist, so, and they are suitable to work in really not well-developed countries. We recently collaborate with several companies in the Czech Republic who are trying to promote use of their recycling technologies in Africa. We keep fingers crossed for them to be successful.
Okay. Let's say we are capable to extract all this plastic waste, you know, to filter it out. What do we do with it then?
I think that's, again, a very hard question to answer, because recently recycling has several steps, and probably the most complicated one is the separation, because the plastic waste contains from polyethylene, polypropylene, PVC, PET, a lot of other polymers, which are different in their chemical nature, different in temperatures under which they can be processed or they degrade. So the separation is a very expensive process, because there is no, the densities are very close to each other, so it's not very simple to separate them. And the second is that a lot of them, they contain additives like color, pigments. A lot of them contain other like etiquettes and so forth. The problem then becomes to separate these and use it as a feedstock. The result might not be that great when we compare the properties to the virgin material. And recently still the virgin material is cheaper because of they don't need all these operations which are expensive. So probably some kind of first stage, some kind of subsidy will help these selected plastic waste to be recycled. but I don't know if it is a sustainable solution.
Okay, but presumably sooner or later something of that measure has to be done, because otherwise if we allow a system just to accumulate without closing the loop and at least somehow getting that circular motion come back into it, then we're just going to end up kicking the can down the road.
I think that will happen, and already the European Commission put forward directives in which they are trying to reduce, first of all, the amount of the plastic waste, but also kind of push reuse, both in recycling or in energy related recycling. But it's not that simple. I think that the society or the people have to kind of think about whether they are not too much spoiled and partly reduce the use of single-use plastics. I don't want to say plastics because they are very useful, but a single-use plastic.
So we have to take a greater responsibility per se, and that link with that is a better degree of education. We have to talk about these subjects, make sure that people do have an understanding of what polymers and plastics really are about, what advantages they really do bring to us, and what are the associated problems we have to collectively resolve.
That's good.
Okay, let's look a bit into the future. You're working in research work in advanced polymer systems. Where will these polymers help us in the future?
Well, there are multiple areas where lightweight materials, and polymers are among the lightweight materials, will find a very important use in the future. Recently, for example, we worked on a group of materials which is called metamaterials. Those are materials which possess some kind of unnatural properties that we can manipulate. We can manipulate acoustic absorption, so we can create, for example, sound insulators as thin as the leaf of paper. There are other possibilities that these materials have behavior which is mechanically non-reciprocal, which means that on one side of the material, when you push it, the other side of the article does not expand, but it shrinks. These materials can be used to collect, harvest mechanical energy. So I guess that plastics have an excellent future, and we have to kind of educate the public that the plastic is not only the plastic bag you can find in the supermarket, but those are lenses, contact lenses. They are artificial valves in heart surgery, and becoming more and more part of electromobiles and so forth.
So in terms of medicine and health and the interaction with our own bodies and polymers, there's a synergy there. These synthetic materials can cooperate with us biologically.
That's right.
And does that necessarily mean, I mean, lots talked about at the moment regarding artificial intelligence and the fact that we're augmenting our own capabilities with our telephones, with all this technology, but there's a bandwidth problem. That means that the speed at which we can communicate with our augmented devices are limited by the speed of our thumb.
Right.
And we're looking at ways to try and get a more direct, high bandwidth communication from ourselves to our devices. Do polymers present a hopeful future in that respect?
I mean, if you look at most of the electronic devices, a huge part of it is plastics, both thermoplastics and the thermosets, which have different structure. But in the future, for example, when we look at really miniature and very fast computational devices, we are looking for quantum computers. And the quantum computers probably will be constructed using single molecules with multiple segments on them, providing the stream on photon pairs, which are able to transmit information in much better way than the current semiconductors.
Okay. So finally, Professor Jančář, the future, will the natural and the synthetic live together in harmony?
It will depend to a great extent on humankind, because we are the ones who kind of control this relationship. And I believe that people without really needing a huge environmental shock will come to finding this balance between the synthetic and the natural. And hopefully we can, with our work, contribute a bit to that direction.
Professor Jančář, good luck and thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.